James Cagney was worth millions, but died alone and heartbroken. The Yankee Doodle Dandy star shocked Hollywood by walking away at the height of his fame. But the real shocker came later. His caregivers took control of his life, cutting off his own children and isolating him on his farm. When his son tried to visit one last time, he found the house stripped bare of family photos. The truth behind his exit from Hollywood wasn't burnout or illness. It was pure tragedy that nobody saw coming. James Cagney was born on July 17, 1899, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The neighborhood was crowded and rough, filled with immigrant families struggling to get by. His parents, Carolyn and James Sr., had 7 children, but 2 died as infants. His father worked as a bartender and had been an amateur boxer, but money was always tight. The family barely made ends meet. Then, in 1918, tragedy struck. The Spanish flu swept through the city, and his father died at just 41. With his father gone, James had no choice but to help his family survive. He took any job he could find. He worked as a bellhop, a janitor, a copy boy for the New York Sun, and even a junior architect. At night, he worked as a doorman. Every cent he earned went to his mother. Even with all this responsibility, he stayed focused on school. He graduated from Stuyvesant High School with honors in 1917 and later attended Columbia College. He planned to study art and German, but money ran out and he had to drop out. Life was never easy. As a child, he had poor health, which he later blamed on malnutrition. But through it all, his mother kept pushing him forward. She believed in hard work and education, and that mindset shaped him. He graduated from Stuyvesant High School in New York City in 1918. After that, he enrolled at Columbia College planning to study art. He also took German and joined the Student Army Training Corps. But his time there was short. The 1918 flu pandemic took his father's life, and Cagney dropped out after one semester to support his family. He took whatever job he could find. He worked as a junior architect, a copy boy for the New York Sun, a book custodian at the New York Public Library, a bellhop, a draftsman, and a night doorkeeper. Every dollar he made went to his family. While working at the library, he met Florence James. She introduced him to the world of acting, though he didn't know then how important that meeting would be. Cagney believed in hard work. Later, he said he felt sorry for kids who had it too easy, because life would eventually hit them hard. Since childhood, he had a talent for movement. He learned tap dancing at a young age, a skill that would one day help him win an Academy Award. People called him Cellar Door Cagney because he liked dancing on slanted cellar doors. He could also hold his own in a fight. He grew up protecting his older brother Harry, who was studying to be a doctor. Cagney even competed in amateur boxing and nearly won the New York State lightweight title. His coaches wanted him to go professional, but his mother refused. Instead, he turned to baseball. He played semi-professionally and dreamed of making it to the major leagues. His first real connection to movies was pure luck. His aunt lived in Brooklyn, right across from Vitagraph Studios. When Cagney visited, he climbed the fence to watch silent film star John Bunny at work. It fascinated him, but he had no interest in being in front of a camera. Later, he helped backstage at Lenox Hill Neighborhood House, one of the country's first settlement houses. His brother Harry performed there under the direction of Florence James. Cagney was happy working behind the scenes, but one night, everything changed. Harry got sick. Cagney had been watching rehearsals closely. He knew every line and every movement. With no time to prepare, he took his brother's place and delivered a flawless performance. His photographic memory helped him pull it off. But something else happened that night. The moment he stepped onto the stage, he felt different. He later said that acting allowed him to forget himself completely. It wasn't just about remembering lines. It was about becoming someone else. That night lit a spark that would shape the rest of his life. He started taking small roles in amateur productions. Acting gave him confidence, but he still wasn't sure if it could be a real career. That changed when he landed his first professional stage job later that year. He was cast in Every Sailor, a wartime revue where servicemen performed in the chorus line dressed as women. He had almost no dance experience, but he knew one complicated step, the Peabody. During auditions, he performed it with such precision that the producers hired him. His pay was $35 per week, an amount that felt like a fortune at the time. At first, he wasn't comfortable playing a woman on stage, but something happened when he put on the costume. The skirts, wigs, and makeup made him feel free. He later said that once he stepped into character, he completely forgot about being Jim Cagney. His mother didn't approve. She wanted him to find a more stable job, so, to please her, he left the theater for a short time and worked as a runner in a brokerage house. But the stage kept calling him back. He soon returned and took a role in Pitter Patter in 1920. This time, he was making $55 per week. He sent $40 of it home to support his mother. That show changed his life in more ways than one. It was where he met Frances Willard Billy Vernon, a chorus girl who would later become his wife. Over the next decade, Cagney worked non-stop in vaudeville and Broadway productions. Money was tight, and he had to take on extra duties backstage, from carrying luggage to helping with costumes. He did whatever it took to stay in the business. His biggest break came in 1929. He landed a role in Penny Arcade, a Broadway play that caught the attention of Al Jolson. Jolson saw something special in Cagney. He bought the film rights and convinced Warner Brothers to keep both Cagney and Joan Blondell for the movie adaptation. That film, Sinner's Holiday, 1930, launched Cagney's Hollywood career. In just a few years, he went from struggling theater actor to one of the most promising new faces in film. Warner Brothers offered him $400 per week under a 3-week contract, a decent sum at the time, but not much by Hollywood standards. However, as soon as filming began, it became clear that Cagney was different. He had a raw energy that stood out, and the studio knew they had something special. Before the movie was even finished, they extended his contract. His talent was obvious, but so was his stubbornness. During production, he flat out refused to deliver a line he thought sounded fake. "I don't give a damn what you tell him. I'm not saying it," he told the director. That kind of defiance could have ended his career before it even started. But Warner Brothers didn't punish him. Instead, they signed him to a 7-year contract. In 1931, he appeared in The Doorway to Hell, a crime drama that helped establish his reputation. But it was his next role that turned him into a star. Originally, he had been cast as the sidekick in The Public Enemy, 1931, playing Matt Doyle while Edward Woods took the lead as Tom Powers. But early in production, director William Wellman saw what audiences would soon realize. Cagney had a presence that couldn't be ignored. The studio switched the roles, giving Cagney the lead. His portrayal of Tom Powers was unlike anything audiences had seen. The film followed Powers from petty crime to full-scale bootlegging, showing the rise of organized crime during Prohibition. Cagney played him with a mix of charm and menace that felt dangerously real. One scene became legendary. In the infamous grapefruit scene, Powers smashes a grapefruit into Mae Clark's face at breakfast. The moment was shocking because it felt so casual. It wasn't just violence, it was control, arrogance, and cruelty in one quick movement. Director William Wellman came up with the idea based on arguments he had with his wife. Clark wasn't warned in advance, so her reaction was completely real. The film had a budget of $151,000 and ended up grossing over $1 million, a huge success at the time. Critics praised Cagney's performance. The New York Herald-Tribune called it the most ruthless, unsentimental appraisal of the meanness of a petty killer. But beyond its success, the film changed Hollywood. It redefined gangster movies, showing criminals not just as villains, but as complex, dangerous figures. At a time when real-life mobsters like Al Capone were dominating headlines, Cagney's performance made the world of crime feel even more real. His rise to fame came with a problem. Warner Brothers now saw him as Hollywood's ultimate gangster and wanted to keep him in crime films. He was typecast. He knew that if he kept playing the same roles, his career would be trapped. So he fought for different kinds of characters. In 1933, he took on Footlight Parade, a musical comedy that showed he could do more than play tough guys. He played Chester Kent, a stressed-out producer trying to create elaborate musical numbers. Audiences who had only seen him as a gangster were surprised. He could dance. He had sharp comedic timing. His tap-dancing routines became a highlight of the film. The elaborate musical sequences, especially By a Waterfall, became iconic thanks to Busby Berkeley's innovative choreography and Cagney's dynamic performance. But his biggest challenge to typecasting came in 1942 with Yankee Doodle Dandy. He played George M. Cohan, the legendary Broadway star known for patriotic songs like Over There and Give My Regards to Broadway. This role was a complete departure from his usual tough guy image. Cagney's energy and charisma made the film a massive hit, and it became Warner Brothers' biggest success at the time. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor, the only Oscar of his career. Even George M. Cohan himself, who was notoriously critical, approved of Cagney's portrayal. James Cagney was one of the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age, but he wasn't the type to just follow orders. He stood up to Warner Brothers at a time when studios had complete control over actors' careers. In 1936, he took them to court for breaking his contract. He was supposed to make no more than 4 films a year, but the studio ignored that. The Los Angeles Superior Court ruled in his favor on March 3, 1936, freeing him from his contract. But winning in court didn't mean winning in Hollywood. No major studio wanted to hire him, while Warner Brothers appealed the case. Taking in someone who had just fought one of the biggest studios was a risk no one wanted. That left Cagney with only one option. He signed with Grand National Pictures, a small independent company that promised him creative freedom. But things didn't go as planned. The 2 films he made there, Great Guy in 1936 and Something to Sing About in 1937, flopped. The losses were devastating. He had won his freedom, but at a huge cost. In 1938, Warner Brothers realized they still needed him. He was too big of a star to ignore. They offered him a new contract, one that gave him more control than almost any other actor at the time. He would be paid $150,000 per film and only had to make 2 per year. He also got full script approval. On top of that, his brother William was guaranteed an assistant producer role on all his projects. It was a deal no actor in Hollywood would have dared to ask for just a few years earlier. Cagney wasn't just fighting for himself. He hated how studios treated their stars. In 1934, during California's gubernatorial race, Hollywood executives pressured actors to donate a day's pay to Governor Frank Merriam's campaign. Cagney refused. He even threatened to give a full week's salary to Merriam's opponent, Upton Sinclair, if they forced him to contribute. That kind of defiance wasn't common in Hollywood, but Cagney wasn't afraid to speak his mind. By 1942, He was ready to leave Warner Brothers again. He was tired of playing gangsters and wanted more creative control. He and his brother William started Cagney Productions, hoping to make films on their own terms. Their first project, Johnny Come Lately in 1943, let Cagney break free from his tough guy image. He played a drifter who takes over a struggling newspaper and fights corruption in a small town. It was a different kind of role, and it proved he had range beyond what the studios had boxed him into. Cagney Productions wasn't just about acting, it was a family business. His brothers Harry and Edward also joined, with William handling most of the production work. They went on to make films like Blood on the Sun in 1945 and The Time of Your Life in 1948. But running a production company wasn't easy. Some films didn't make enough money. Disagreements over costs made things worse. By 1949, Cagney had to return to Warner Brothers, but he made his comeback count with White Heat, one of the greatest crime films of all time. In White Heat, he played Cody Jarrett, a brutal and unpredictable criminal with an unhealthy obsession with his mother. From the first scene, Cody proves he is dangerous. During a train robbery, he kills without hesitation and laughs while doing it. He has a strange sense of humor, too. In one scene, he locks a traitor in a car trunk, shoots holes in it, and says, "Stuffy, huh? I'll give you a little air," while eating a chicken leg. Moments like this made him one of the most chilling gangsters in film history. Cagney's performance builds toward an unforgettable ending. Cornered at the top of an oil refinery, betrayed by his own men, Cody doesn't beg or surrender. Instead, he shouts, "Made it, Ma! Top of the world!" before blowing himself up in a massive explosion. The scene became legendary. Critics called White Heat one of the greatest crime films of all time, and Cagney's role as Cody Jarrett remains one of his most iconic. But Cagney wasn't just a gangster. In Yankee Doodle Dandy, he played George M. Cohan, a Broadway composer and performer who wrote famous patriotic songs like Over There and You're a Grand Old Flag. The film showed a completely different side of Cagney. He danced, sang, and played Cohan with incredible energy. His performance won him his only Academy Award for Best Actor. Cohan himself approved of Cagney playing him. They had both started in vaudeville, so the casting made sense. Even though Cagney wasn't a trained dancer, his tap dancing scenes became legendary. He made up some of the moves on the spot, adding his own unique style. The movie became a huge hit, winning 3 Oscars and earning 8 nominations. In 1993, it was chosen for the National Film Registry for being culturally important. Then there was Angels with Dirty Faces. This film gave Cagney one of his most complex roles. He played Rocky Sullivan, a gangster who grew up with a priest named Jerry Connolly, played by Pat O'Brien. While Rocky embraces crime, Jerry dedicates his life to keeping kids off the streets. The 2 childhood friends end up on opposite sides of the law. Rocky is charming but deadly, a man who enjoys being admired. But the film's final scene is what makes it unforgettable. Sentenced to die in the electric chair, Rocky is asked for one last favor. Jerry begs him to show fear so that the boys who look up to him will turn away from crime. In his last moments, Rocky breaks down, screaming in terror as he is dragged away. But was it real? Or was he faking it to help his friend? Cagney leaves the answer up to the audience. The film was a huge success and earned 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Actor for Cagney. Many critics consider it one of his finest performances. It also had a lasting impact, showing how the media could turn criminals into heroes and influence young people. Through these 3 films, Cagney proved why he was one of Hollywood's greatest actors. He could be terrifying, funny, or deeply emotional, sometimes all at once. James Cagney was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but his personal life was far from the perfect picture. Behind the scenes, his later years were marked by heartbreak, isolation, and a surprising decision to walk away from fame. His relationship with his two adopted children, James Jr. and Kathleen Casey Cagney, became painfully strained over time. Much of this was due to the interference of caregivers who controlled access to Cagney and his wife, Billie Vernon. These people isolated the couple, even keeping family members away during critical moments. The situation became so extreme that when James Jr. tried to visit their farm to reconcile, police escorted him off the property. That moment shattered any hope of repairing the fractured relationship. James Jr. had never been interested in his father's fortune. He served in the Marines and later ran a gas station in Maine, refusing financial help from Cagney. What he really wanted was his father's attention. But the distance between them only grew. In 1984, James Jr. died of a heart attack at just 42 years old. His father passed away 2 years later. Casey, who shared her father's love for horses, struggled with health issues for much of her life. She passed away in 2004 at 64. Their childhood had been far from ordinary. Billie Vernon kept them in separate living spaces at both their Beverly Hills estate and their property in Martha's Vineyard. This created a sense of emotional and physical distance that never really faded. By the time James Jr. visited the farm for a final goodbye, the house had been emptied of furniture and personal belongings. He broke down in tears, feeling like his family's history had been erased. Cagney was known for his tough exterior, but his private life was filled with sorrow. His retirement from Hollywood in 1961 was not a dramatic farewell. He simply stepped away after completing 1, 2, 3, a Cold War comedy directed by Billy Wilder. The experience of making that film pushed him to his limit. Playing the fast-talking Coca-Cola executive C.R. McNamara was exhausting. Wilder's perfectionism made things even harder, with some scenes requiring over 50 takes. Cagney also clashed with his co-star Horst Buchholz, whom he accused of trying to steal scenes. It was one of the rare times in his career that he openly resented another actor. One event during filming had an even greater impact. While in Germany, Cagney visited the Dachau concentration camp. The experience shook him to his core. It made Hollywood feel meaningless. Acting had once been his passion, but now it felt like nothing more than a chore. He had spent over 40 years in the industry, starring in more than 60 films. Now, he was ready to leave it all behind. There was no press conference or big announcement. He simply walked away. Over the years, he turned down multiple offers to return, including a role in The Godfather Part 2. Hollywood no longer mattered to him. For 2 decades, he stayed out of the spotlight, only making a brief comeback in 1981 for Ragtime. But that was a rare exception. His decision to retire was final. Instead of the glitz and glamour, Cagney found peace on an 800-acre farm in Dutchess County, New York. He had always said that acting was never his first choice. His real dream was to live a quiet life in the countryside. And that is exactly what he did. With Billy by his side, he spent his days painting, writing poetry, and even playing tennis. Well into his later years, he remained active, enjoying a life far removed from Hollywood. He rarely made public appearances, only stepping back into the spotlight for special occasions. In 1974, he accepted the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. But that was one of the few times he looked back on his career. His heart belonged to the farm, not to Hollywood. James Cagney's return to acting in Ragtime, 1981, was something no one expected. He had been retired for 20 years, but at 81, he stepped back in front of the camera. Director Milos Forman convinced him to take on the role of Police Commissioner Rhinelander Waldo. It wasn't an easy decision. Cagney had suffered a stroke that left him weakened, and he was battling sciatica, which made movement painful. But he accepted the challenge. Ragtime was based on E.L. Doctorow's novel, a story set in early 20th century America. Cagney's role wasn't large, but it was important. Forman admired him so much that he let him choose his own part. Cagney picked the police commissioner, a character that suited his natural authority. The shoot lasted 9 weeks, and despite his health problems, he stayed on set even after filming his scenes. He offered advice to younger actors, including Howard Rollins Jr., who asked how to perform a death scene. Cagney's answer was simple: just die. Seeing him on screen again after 2 decades felt like a moment in history. Ragtime wasn't just a film. It was proof that Cagney's presence still had power. The movie also brought together past and future Hollywood. He shared the screen with rising stars like Samuel L. Jackson and Elizabeth McGovern. For audiences, it was a reminder of why he had once been one of the biggest names in cinema. 3 years later, in 1984, he made his final appearance in Terrible Joe Moran, a television movie that reflected his own life in many ways. He played an aging ex-boxer, once great, but now confined to a wheelchair. Cagney had suffered multiple strokes by then, and his speech was slurred. The production team decided to dub much of his dialogue using impressionist Rich Little, a decision that sparked controversy. The film used clips from Winner Take All, 1932, to show Moran in his prime. It was a striking contrast between youth and old age, a reminder of how much time had passed. The script had been rewritten to match Cagney's physical condition. Instead of hiding his struggles, the film embraced them, making his character's reliance on a wheelchair a central part of the story. His performance was deeply moving. Even with all the challenges, Terrible Joe Moran won an Emmy in 1984, adding one last award to his long list of achievements. Cagney's impact on Hollywood had already been recognized years earlier. In 1974, he became only the second person to receive the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. Frank Sinatra presented the honor during a televised ceremony on March 31st. The night was filled with tributes to his incredible career. Charlton Heston recalled an early review that had once dismissed Cagney as unfit for the big time. The joke was on them. By then, he had starred in some of the most influential films in history. Then, in 1980, he received the Kennedy Center Honors, another tribute to his lasting influence. Cagney had transformed the way actors played tough, complex characters. He set the stage for stars like Humphrey Bogart and Robert De Niro. He wasn't just a leading man. He had shaped an entire generation of performers. But while the world celebrated him, his later years were filled with health struggles. He was diagnosed with diabetes, which led to further complications. By the late 1970s, strokes had left him partially paralyzed and in a wheelchair. His sciatica made every movement painful. Despite this, he pushed himself to return for Ragtime in 1981. Even then, he needed special accommodations on set. His condition worsened in the early 1980s. He was hospitalized multiple times for heart problems and lung congestion. In 1984, he was admitted again after breaking his strict salt-free diet. His caregivers did their best, but the illnesses took a toll. By this time, he could no longer enjoy horseback riding or painting, two of his greatest passions. His world became smaller. What made these years even harder was the emotional distance from his own family. His caregivers, under the pretense of protecting him, slowly cut off contact between Cagney and his adopted children, James Jr. and Kathleen. His son once visited Verney Farm, the Cagney estate, only to find that many family belongings had been taken away. It was a painful moment. Friends saw the growing divide, but felt powerless to stop it. Despite all this, he still had people who stood by him. His wife, Billie Vernon, whom he had been married to for over 60 years, remained at his side. Close friends like Marge Zimmerman visited often. When the end came, he wasn't alone. On Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1986, James Cagney passed away at Verney Farm at the age of 86. Just days earlier, he had been released from Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City, where doctors had advised that he spend his final days at home. His death was peaceful. According to Marge Zimmerman, he simply closed his eyes while preparations were being made for breakfast. She later reflected on the timing. "If he had to go, Easter Sunday was a good time," she said. His funeral was held at St. Francis de Sales Church in Manhattan, the same church where he had received his first communion as a child. Hundreds gathered outside to pay their respects. Inside, close friends and family attended a private service. Among the pallbearers were director Milos Forman and ballet star Mikhail Baryshnikov. Cagney was laid to rest at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York.